I do want to say one other thing, though, since I have 1 more minute only. Christopher said it's very possible to have great cultural achievements without the supernatural. Really? Really? May I offer this thought as one who was a part-time orchestral conductor and deeply involved in classical music? By and large, the death of God in the Western world has led to the death of great art. Music since the age of secularism stinks. Art since the age of secularism stinks. What our art galleries are filled with today are fecal matter, urine, menstrual blood, and the like. They are moronic cartoons that fill our galleries. It was only God and the pervasiveness of God in the Western world that produced great art. It is an empty, empty chamber, the secular chamber.
Mr. D'Souza.
I thought I would focus my rebuttal on 2 themes that I think have been brought front and center in this debate. The first one is the offer of a prize, which always gets my attention. Name a principle of virtue invented by theism. And I'm going to name one invented specifically by Christianity. That is the movement to abolish slavery. Slavery is a universal institution. It's existed in all cultures. For millennia, slavery needed no defenders because it had no critics. Now, for the first time in Western civilization, slavery became controversial. Not just in the modern era. Slavery was abolished in most of Europe between the 4th century and the 10th century. And then starting in the modern era, groups of people, first the Quakers and then the evangelical Christians, took a theological premise, we are all created equal in the eyes of God, and derived from it a political conclusion. Therefore, no man has the right to rule another man without his consent. This idea, this political application of a theological maxim, became the basis not merely of anti-slavery or abolition, but also of modern democracy. Because the premise of modern representative democracy is precisely that no man has the right to rule another without consent. Here is a distinct and I think unarguable historical example. I don't deny there were Christians on the other side of a virtue that was not in the world before the Christians, based on a theological proposition, derived it. There have been no purely atheist anti-slavery movements anywhere. Now, I now want to address the issue of Hitler, because you have to remember that Hitler, in Mein Kampf, says very clearly that I will say anything, propaganda he defines, as lying to achieve a goal. And in the early years, in the 1930s, in fact, if you go to atheist websites, you'll see a lot of quotations in which Hitler seems to endorse Christianity and the cross. You'll notice those quotations are all between about 1933 and they stop about 1936. Why? In the early years, Hitler was trying to win over the Bavarian Catholics and the Lutheran Protestants, and so he invented an Aryan Christ, sort of the killer of the Jews, and tried to sell this to the German churches. They didn't buy it. And so the moment Hitler got to power, and by the way, Hitler's own views on Christianity extensively stated in a book called Hitler's Table Talk, assembled by his own close aides. He dripped with venom and hatred for Christianity. He saw it as the main obstacle to creating a secular, race-based utopia. And the leading people around Hitler, Bormann, Heydrich, Himmler, were avowed atheists who were given the specific charge of undermining and destroying the churches in Germany. All of this is pretty well outlined in Richard Evans' multi-volume History of the Third Reich. So this idea that Hitler was some sort of a closet Christian, complete nonsense. Now, one thing that Christopher does in these debates is he takes the crimes of Christianity and he blames them on Christianity, and then he takes the crimes of atheism and he blames them on Christianity. Now, this is cheating. The philosopher Daniel Dennett said very clearly, and I realize I've just got a few seconds, he said, listen, if Islam is to blame for Hamas and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda, if there's something about Islam that gave rise to that, and if even the ordinary Muslim must take some responsibility for that, and even if the peace-loving Christian bears some responsibility for the Crusades and the Inquisition and the Salem witch trials, by the same logical token and extension, even the peace-loving atheist, yes, even you, Christopher, bear some responsibility for the horrendous crimes, the ocean of blood and the mountain of bodies. Not just Mao, not just Stalin, even a junior leaguer like Pol Pot. He's a little league atheist, doesn't even make it in the top category. He kills about 2 million in the space of 3 years. So you can't get around that. Atheism was their inspiration and the creation of a new man in a new utopia, liberated from traditional religion and morality. This was, in fact, the goal of those atheist regimes.
Thank you. I think what might work better is if, Christopher, you just take 5 minutes and essentially if you can cross-examine, jump in, rebut, whatever, and then as long as it doesn't turn into a tag team, we just sort of proceed from there. So take 5.
Right. I'll do it in reverse order if you don't mind. I'll take what's fresh in your mind. I was talking not just about Hitler's attitude to the church, which was indeed very conflicted, and though not a secular one, the desire to replace religion with a Nordic, Aryan, race-based paganism may be many things, but it's not secular. I was talking about the church's attitude to fascism and National Socialism, and that's what disgraces Christianity. They had to know. If you're right, Dinesh, they had to know that the ultimate aim of National Socialism was to depose their church. That didn't stop them groveling to it and sharing with it in the two main pillars of its propaganda, anti-Semitism and hatred of Marxism. Now, if you want me to accept responsibility for the Khmer Rouge, because I don't believe in God, you're not going to get me to do it, okay? And there's no one in this room who would think that was a fair indictment. If I say I don't believe in God, I do not become responsible for the crimes of Pol Pot, by definition. If I had published an article saying the Khmer Rouge were misunderstood agricultural reformers, as I do have some friends on the left who I would have to say, remain my friends, did, then I would have to feel a twinge about the crimes of the Khmer Rouge, but not otherwise. And if you think that North Korea, where I've been, is a secular state, you overlook the fact that it is based upon the worship of a dead man whose son is his reincarnation. It's one short of a trinity. It's the most perfectly religious state I've ever seen. And if you don't realize there's a connection between Stalinism and the pre-existing cult of the Tsar, a supreme head of the state who was also head of a church and considered to have supernatural properties, then you haven't done much work in cultural studies. And if I say, I don't think that God created the universe, or me, I don't become responsible for the Gulag. And is there anyone here who can supply the middle term to the syllogism that would suggest that I do? Quite plainly not. In order for your charge to work, you would have to point to a society or a state that adopted as its ruling precepts the ideas of Lucretius and Democritus and Epicurus and Galileo and Spinoza and Jefferson and Voltaire and Einstein and Richard Dawkins and so on, and then fell into slavery, backwardness, famine, and the rest of it. And you won't be able to find such a society, and you won't be able to have a proper comparison or a fair level playing field in that way. Actually, the nearest there is to such a society is the great republic in which we are this evening met, the only country in the world that ever has written itself a secular constitution, and much of whose glory is precisely for that reason.